Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a fancy title. I'm not sure if my presentation will live up to the title. It's actually about how to do things, how we do things. And we are Aixsponza, a 3D studio based in Munich, Germany. We're working for television commercials. We do trade show backgrounds. Our bigger clients include Nike. We did a lot for Red Bull. Recently, we also worked for a German kids feature film that is going to be released in January 19. I brought a sneak peek of that today as well, but I guess the best thing in every presentation is to start with a demo reel. So here's work that we did in the past 2 years or so.
Your hands, my hands, your mouth, my mouth, your body, my body. Ooh, you make it all so simple. Oh, oh, so simple. You make it all so simple. Oh, oh, oh. I shake for you, baby. I shake for you, baby. All over. I shake for you, baby. I shake for you, baby. All over. You make it all so simple. Oh, oh, so simple. You make it all so simple. Yeah. I shake for you, baby. I shake for you, baby. All over. I shake for you, baby. I shake for you, baby. All over. I shake for you, baby. 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 I shake.
And that's how I spend my days. As Cinema 4D is the main program that we use in our company, we are also part of the beta team, and that's why we got early access to release 20 and could use some of its new features already on a few productions that we did. My personal favorites are volumes and fields. And this is the two features that I'm going to focus on in my presentation today, namely volumes. And if you say that, oh, now we have volumes, maybe you're asking yourself, what are volumes? So just a very, very quick overview of what volumes actually are would be a pretty good way to start, I guess. And I run through that really quickly because everyone who's presenting here is explaining this. You can find lots and lots of videos on the internet explaining what volumes are, so I just run through that quickly. This is the traditional way of doing objects in 3D. I'm using 2 dimensions because it's always a good idea to just reduce things and explain it in simple examples and then build on top of that. So we're doing a circle here in 3 dimensions. Of course, it's a sphere. Everyone likes spheres. And without volumes, in a traditional way of working in 3 dimensions, you would build objects by placing points, the orange dots, connecting those points with lines, and this is forming an object. In 3 dimensions, the dots will be forming polygons, so it's forming spheres. The thing is that you're actually only describing the surface of an object. You create a hollow object. There's nothing really inside. All you have in the program is the surface. With volumes, that's different. With volumes, what you do is you define a grid. Basically, what you do in a pixel image, you've got a grid and you can fill it with information. In an image, the pixels are filled with color values. When you're modeling in 3D, these would be 3-dimensional pixels. In 3D, pixels are called voxels, just to have a difference in names. And you can fill those with values. Now, if you want to use the grid to save the shape of the object, the easiest way to do would be put number ones inside and put zeros outside. So now you saved in the grid that here's an object. Outside of your object definition of your surface, there's 0, so there's nothing there. This would be the easiest way, and this is called a fog volume. That's available in Cinema. You can use this to save objects, to describe objects. It's very easy to calculate because it's just ones and zeros that you have to save. There's no complex calculations going on. It's very straightforward, so it's very fast to calculate and very fast to work with. But the downside is that the information that is there is sort of limited. You know, okay, this is inside of an object, this is outside of an object, and that's it. Now you might ask yourself, oh, that's enough information really. What else could I save into this grid-like structure? For example, you could not only save, okay, 1, yes, 0, no, but you could save the distances. You could save into this grid cell that it's 3.2 centimeters away from your surface. You could save into the other one that it's 6.8 centimeters away. That's one information you can store. And the second piece of information you can store is, if you put a minus in front, you are storing that this is inside of your object. If you put a plus in front, you're storing that this is outside of your object. So now you save the distance. And as you put a sign in front of your number, you saved inside, outside. And as you are signing the number and you're saving a distance, this is called a signed distance field. As it's a very long word, usually it's abbreviated with SDF. This is also available in Cinema. That's the two modes of volumes that are available in Cinema. You've got more information, so you can do more to your grid because you know more about what your scene is all about. But of course, this is heavier to calculate because for every grid cell, you need to calculate the distance first before you save it. So this is slower to generate as a grid. All right, what can be done with that kind of information? The most straightforward thing that you can do is you can say, okay, if I generated my signed distance field, now I want to grow my object by 2 centimeters. This is very easy now that you have that information, because you look for cells that have the number 2, plus 2, because that means that's 2 centimeters away from my original surface. And then you tell the part of the program that's generating the mesh, just create a mesh at every cell that has 2, and now you've grown your object. With signed distance field, it's very easy to grow objects, to shrink objects, and also to smooth objects, because you can just take the number, do a Gaussian blur like in Photoshop. You're blurring the numbers, therefore blurring the surface of your object. So that's operations that can be done very easily in a signed distance field and are not possible in a fog volume. So that's the difference. Fog for simple things, very fast and to work with. Signed distance field for more complex operations, but a bit slower to work with because all these numbers have to be calculated first. Oops. That's what volumes are as a principle. Now, what could you use volumes for? You can use them for modeling and for very rapid modeling, that is, because what signed distance field and also volumes are very good for are Boolean operations when you want to subtract one object from the other. If I just go back to a fog volume, here it's very easy if you have 2 objects to subtract the objects from each other, because all you have to do is calculate 1 minus 1. Then you subtracted one object from the other. If you calculate 1 minus 0, you don't subtract anything. So Boolean operations really, really fast to do in a structure like this, because you're not caring about polygon surfaces and edge flows and stuff, but this is a very good structure to do Boolean modeling. So using volumes for very fast modeling when it comes to Boolean operations is a very good idea. A project that we have used it on is Checker Toby and the Secret of Our Planet. Checker Toby is a TV series on German television. Toby is going out into the world and trying to check out what things are about. It's an educational series for children. So they are always focusing on one topic and explaining how things work, and it's good for children because it's entertaining and it's also educational. That's the mix that they are doing. And he's rather popular, so he got a feature film coming to cinemas 31st of January 2019, and we did all the 3D rendering for it. It's got about 15 minutes of 3D shots in it, explanatory stuff. There's no trailer yet because we are only at grading stage, so I can't show you a trailer, but I got permission to show you a few images of assets that we have used, and it all happens in a very toy-like environment. So this is a toy truck that we have built to be used in a few shots that we did for the film, and this is modeled exclusively using volumes, because everything that's subtracting one object from another object, volumes is your way to go. Also this one, soft structures, organic surfaces also lend themselves to volume modeling, so this is a perfect example as you can create these things rather quickly. A toy rocket, that's also got a lot of traditional poly modeling, but the main thing in the middle here, that was volume modeled, or the Boolean holes that you can see were done using volumes, and that's all very quick to do. The toy train, the smog lock, who's damaging our environment, unfortunately. But little spoiler, in the feature film, everything's going to be okay because it's a kids movie. That one was done with volumes as well, and from the empty cinema scene, Control N, create a new scene, to the finished mesh without shading, it took me, and I watched the clock, it took me 12 minutes to create the engine piece, so this is really fast modeling. And how you do this, we're going to look in a bit of a live presentation. In the program, here's my file without volumes. That's the basic thing. Let me just show you in a new file how to use the setup, how to use the system. So what you do is you would create a few objects and say, okay, I want to create a cube and I want to subtract that sphere here. Really primitive example, but what you do is you get yourself a volume builder, you drop the two objects in, the signed distance field is created, represented by these gray rectangles that you see. So now we don't have any polygons anymore, but we have an actual filled volume that is representing my objects. If you want to have more detail, because right now it's very coarse, if you want to have finer detail, there's one main setting to adjust the detail. That's the voxel size here. As I mentioned before, voxel is just a name for a three-dimensional pixel, so that's our voxels here, three-dimensional pixels. If you want to have more resolution, you have to make the individual voxel smaller. So if I type in 1, for example, you get a bit more resolution. And now you can come in here and say, okay, here's the sphere. Right now it's a union with the cube. If I switch this to subtract, you're doing a Boolean subtract, and you're good to go. That's the principle behind volume as a modeling tool. There's two main things you can do with your result. You can either smooth it by putting a smooth layer on top. Now you see that you get sort of beveled edges. It's smoothing the result, and in a reshape layer, you can do extrusion or growing of an object and shrinking of an object by just, right now it's offsetting the surface by +5. That's what I put in my slides. You're growing the object by 5. If you put in -10, you're shrinking the object by 10. Making it smaller. So this is the principle behind volume as a modeling tool. In my smog lock, it's pretty much the same thing. It's all primitive object. Here's a cylinder, here's a sphere, here's a cube. and I just arrange them so that the primitive objects are forming the shape of the engine that I want to have. And if I go in, say, okay, here's my volume builder. If I switch that on, it's calculating the volume, and it's putting all these objects I just arranged together into one surface. If we look closely, there's a small cut here. Disable the volume builder to see the objects. That's just a ring that I placed. And in the volume builder, if I just make that bigger so you can see better what's going on, because that's a really long list of objects. Here's the torus, and I set it to subtract, so it's creating that small indent here. This is a good example of how not to work. At the office, I'm always promoting the idea of 1, name your objects, and 2, put it into sensible hierarchies. This is completely not good. And this scene looks like this because I made it myself. If this was done by a freelancer or intern or so, he would get screamed at, I guess. But you know, you're getting sloppy. And I was so excited forming the shape and putting everything together, so I forgot about naming. So please name your objects and use hierarchies, because it makes things easier and doesn't give you a messy list like this. Please. One thing you can see, that the volume system is accepting pretty much any object there is in Cinema. There's converted objects, polygon objects as input. I used a lot of generator objects like not converted cubes and tubes. There's an extrude here, there's a sweep here, there's a symmetry here. There's even a cloth surface, which I used to give it a bit of thickness. That one object that I put in. And it's accepting everything. It's even accepting splines, which is a cool thing, because that front bit, I don't know what it is called, that cow protection thingy. This is actually splines that I have drawn. And in the volume builder, splines are accepted as input. There's a value down here. You can define a radius, so all my splines go into the surface with a radius of 1.6. And splines are accepted as well. Very nice. Also other things, pretty much anything that is there in Cinema. Particles are accepted. You can drop in particle systems and you get volumes out of particles. Hair, everything that is there is accepted into Cinema's volume system. And once you created the volume, the last step is to maybe put a smooth layer on top. This is not looking so good right now, because the smooth layer is dependent on a voxel distance, and for quick feedback I set the voxel size rather high. The final output size, voxel size, was 0.2 centimeters, and as the blur happens on a voxel distance, as you make the voxel resolution smaller, the blur is getting smaller as well. That's why we get so much blur right now. And in the end, you mesh the volume. There's a volume mesher right here. If you put your builder in, so if you put your volume into the mesher, it is giving you a mesh, and you're done. You would need to up the resolution to actually get the final mesh. I'm not doing this. It's taking about 25 seconds on this machine to calculate the really high resolution mesh. I think, hopefully you believe me that this is actually the scene that I used. Color. Of course, you want to color your smog lock. This is a small piece. There's 2 ways of coloring this. One is abusing the correction deformer. The correction deformer is a deformer you can find in the deformers list. You put it in, and what it does is it's giving you a virtual representation of your mesh. So what it is intended to be used for is to just go in and do correctional modeling. The correction deformer is deformed. It's giving you the surface, the vertices, the polygons, and you can use it to put additional modeling on top. That's not what we're going to do. We use it to put color on top in the shape of a vertex color tag. If you try to put a vertex color tag on the volume mesher, it's not working. It's not adding a tag because the volume mesher is generating a dynamic surfaces, the point count is changing. And in cinema, vertex color doesn't support changing point count. You need static meshes. And this is potentially not a static mesh because I could animate the objects that are inside creating the volume. So I use a correction deformer instead, add a vertex color tag, and tell it, okay, please use fields. Fields is also new with release 20. It's basically like the fall-offs that you know from release 19 or prior, but they have been improved quite a lot with a lot of new functionality. One is that you can use fields to write color into vertex color tags. So what I do is I just get myself a spherical field, place it right, and as you can see, now that spherical field is controlling where color goes. If I move that up a bit, I could use the field to color my volume depending on position. If you want to render this, you get yourself a material, put a effects vertex map shader in there, and then you can use the color that you've written in your vertex color tag in the shader, and now you render it, and it's not working because you obviously need to apply the material first, stupid me. And now you render, and you've got a purple top and a black base, and the purple is coming from the spherical field because in here, every field that you create gets assigned a random color. This one got assigned a purple color. Of course, you can, for example, use white because now you created yourself a mask that you can use in a shader. Black would be painted metal, white would be masking out a gold shader. So that's how you can colorize volumes, even though volumes themselves as dynamic surfaces can't really be touched that well in terms of coloring them. That's number one, using a correction deformer to color your volumes. Way number two, to color your volumes is to simply convert it to polygons. That's what we did with the smog lock, which is converted the mesh. As you can see, the mesher is not generating nice low-res meshes. It's a brute force way of meshing, but it's very quick to do so. And with modern render engines, you don't really need to care about having low poly representations of your meshes anymore. That whole smog lock thing has, I think, well, let's check it, how many polygons are there? 4.2 million. And we put it into a scene, put a surrounding around it, and maybe the final scene was 25 million polygons or so, and that's not really that much problem for modern render engines. So the need for low-res edge flow topology is not really there if you have static non-deforming meshes. Of course, for characters and when you need to deform them, you need good topology. With static objects, the amount of work that goes into retopologizing is not really needed because you can just use the high-res. So what we did to put color on, we converted the volume surface into a polygon surface, and now we can just do selection tags and put our shaders onto selection tags in a very non-fancy way, just straightforward, slap your shaders on. This is volumes for rapid modeling. Of course, you can also use volumes for more designery things. We did a short animation, a short piece for the release of Cinema 20. In beta phase, we did a lot of tests and were playing around with the features, and it was all very exciting. And then we noticed that we did a lot of scenes and setups, and they sort of looked nice, but they didn't really fit together as a combined animation piece. So we just took all the playing around scenes that we created, sort of unified the look by putting shaders on, lighting it, and we created this animations. There's no story. Just in case you're wondering what the storyline is, I can tell you there's none, because it's just a result of us playing around with a beta version of Release 20, and Maxon decided to even link it on their Release 20 release page, so that was very nice for us. we first thought we could call it what the fuck, because really, but that's not really great for marketing. So Chroma is the name, because it's white plus a color. It's got one object in, which is called a Detroit, a gate. A gate is a kind of mineral stone. I'm not really into minerals, so I can't really tell you where that name comes from. But I can tell you what it is. A Detroit, a gate is called Detroit, a gate, because that's how it's looking for real. And the way these stones are created, they are created stones, not natural gemstones. Back in the good old days, when Detroit was still strong on building cars and not an empty town where nothing is going on that it is right now. Back in the good old days where Chrysler was still strong, they had a paint shop painting the cars that they did, and someone left a pen in the paint shop and said, okay, left my pen, just leave it there, and they started painting the cars. And when he came back 6 weeks after or so to get his pen back, the guy noticed that there has been collecting paint on his pen in layers, and this is where that comes from. He cut the pen in two halves, and he was seeing all that layers of colors that have collected on that object he left in the car paint shop. And this is how these kind of gemstones are created. You spray an starting piece, like any object that you can find, and you spray it with colors, you leave it to harden, you spray, you harden it, you spray, you build up layers of colors, and then you polish it, you cut it in half, polish it in nice shapes, and that's how Detroit gates are created. And this is the idea behind this object that we used in our animation, because as we analyze what's going on here, this effect is based on the distance to the surface. So as you're going inside the objects, you move through colors, through a gradient, and the gradient is basically mapped on the distance to the outer surface. That's what is the idea behind that thing. And anything that's based on the distance to a surface should now trigger you thinking, ooh, signed distance field. Because a signed distance field, as I just explained, is just the saved distance to the surface. So you can use a signed distance field and the numbers that are saved in there and map it to a color gradient. I wanted to do this as a live demo, but unfortunately my file was broken, so we have to resort to slides here. This is what's in my shot. The objects, that's a photogrammetry scan of an artichoke cut into half. I put, again, a vertex color top, a vertex color tag on top. And in that tag, I was telling it, okay, take the volume subdivision surface as the input and put a colorizer on top. And this was the result. It's not looking really nice because the range is wrong. The volume signed distance field saves numbers that are just centimeter values distance from the surface. The colorizer is expecting an input range from 0 to 100%. So you need to map the range in the signed distance field to 0 to 100% to get sensible results from the colorizer. And as fields in cinema really come with a lot of options, you can also do things like a range mapper that's available in this menu down here, where you can just map ranges so you know, okay, I want to go on the inside, so there needs to be a minus here, and now comes an information that you can find nowhere, and it's exclusive from me to you, what to put in here, because that's percentage, but this here is centimeters. I know that from the outermost point to the deepest point of that cut is roughly 40 centimeters, but this is percentages here. The factor to get from centimeter to percentage is kind of arbitrary. I don't know why they did it, but what happens is 1 centimeter equals 100%. So that's why I did minus 40 centimeters, 0 equals minus 4,000%, and this is mapping my color range right. So now I'm going from minus 40 centimeters, and I'm mapping that range to 0 to 100%, and that's why the colorizer is now giving me the colors that you see in the rendering. That's a little gem in my presentation, mapping ranges from sign distance field to other ranges. 1 centimeter equals 100%. That's something you have to know. All right. Going into cinema once again. One thing I'd like to show you is this shot here. It was also in Chroma. The sphere is popping up from beneath the surface and it's exploding into smaller spheres, and they are influencing a cloner that is cloning a hexagonal grid, and it's basically moving it up. What happens if we look into that vertex map here? Again, I'm a really big fan of vertex maps because they are giving you a lot of power, because you can use them everywhere in cinema. You can drive a displacer with vertex map, you can limit deformers, you can do really a lot of stuff, you can render them. Vertex maps, vertex color maps are really a powerful tool, sometimes a bit underrated, I think, by people, but I'm a big fan of them, and now especially in release 20 they became a lot more powerful because vertex maps can now be driven by fields, the revamped fall-offs that are there. What happens here is I deactivate everything that's here, and I see even the bottom one. Now we're just looking at the small spheres. If I hit play, when the small spheres are exploding, you can see that they are generating a dot in the vertex map based on a radius. So 2 centimeters around the small spheres, we're getting dots in the vertex map, which is nice, but not really that super awesome. To make it super awesome, what you could do is you can add a delay, and that means it's adding a delay. They are not disappearing immediately, but the dots created by the spheres are staying for a bit. It's basically a paint-on effect. The organic movement that you can see is caused by the mode set to spring. If you don't want that, you can set it to smooth, and then all that organic wobbling is gone because it doesn't have a spring-like behavior anymore, but they are just staying and doing traces in a smooth way. But I thought that going to spring and just having that nicer movement is pretty okay. To have them disappear more quickly, you can use a decay. Decay meaning that the traces don't stay on for that long, they are disappearing quicker. It's not really that obvious because I just used a tiny little bit of it, but I thought it would be quite okay. And that last thing, because what I wanted in this shot was the appearance of the spheres creating small waves without a liquid simulation. In a fast way, just having waves behind the spheres, and the waves are done using a remap. With a remap, you get a curve, and you can tell, okay, that is just a gradient. It's vertex maps are where they are red, that means it's 0%. Where they are yellow, it means there's 100% saved at that vertex. And you can remap the gradient using a curve. And when you do that, what you get is the same gradient as before, the same vertex map as before, but that curve is put onto that linear gradient, so it's looking a bit more interesting, and it's looking a bit like waves emitted by the small spheres without any simulation or anything. So that's a really nice effect, and that vertex map was used to drive a cloner that was in here, cloning hexagonal shapes and just controlling how much they move up. Was it in here? Yeah, it was in here. There's a plane effector that is moving the cloners up by 1.5 centimeters, and this is controlled by that vertex map I just created by switching on fall-offs and using fields, and we're using the vertex maps to control the plane effector, and the plane effector is moving up the clones. And if you hit play, I'm not sure if it runs in real time. Yeah, sort of. You get what you have just seen in the vertex map, you can now see in my cloner. That's just a way to represent my vertex map and to make the rendering a bit look a bit nicer. So that's cool for really quick, fakey impact wave things when you don't want to do simulation. Another project where we use that, because sometimes you do tests and you do playing around and then boom, a project comes around and you can use exactly that test that you have just done in a real paid project. And that's what we did in Nike for the Soccer World Cup 2018. That didn't really go well for Germany, unfortunately, but it went well for us because we were booked to do the worldwide campaign for Nike accompanying the Soccer World Cup this summer for online print and whatnot. And that's a few layout images that we sent to them just to get away from that technical thing. My talk was very technical until here. I thought maybe let's just look at a few pretty pictures. That's a small peek into our process. That would be images that we send out to Nike, just trying to get a look with them, trying to get feedback, what they think. The whole thing was about 4 different kinds of soccer boots that Nike is doing, and their strongest feature, their USP is that they have a very, very colorful sole. So the idea was to just take that very strong and prominent color and have it featured prominently in our shots and keep everything else white. Just a bit like what we did with Chroma just now, because that's a trendy thing and we do trendy things. There's a green shoe. Another idea was to have a bit of a link to the animal world and get aggressive animals in, like that scorpion thing, because sport athletes are athletic, they are aggressive, they are muscular, and there's power and stuff, and scorpions have power and stuff, so that fits nicely. So these are images we send out. They are already looking a lot like the final product would look like, and we discovered that this is a very good way of communicating with the client, because the client doesn't need any imagination at all. Nike does have imagination, not dissing clients here, but it's really nice for clients and also for us to see what the project actually will look like in the end. So we're not doing any sketches that much anymore. We're jumping straight into 3D, render out the real thing. And the very good thing is, if Nike comes back to us and says, oh, we like the scorpion, we like that scorpion like Nike swoosh, can we go with that? We can say, oh, of course we can go with that, because it's finished already. And then we just render it with proper samples and we're done. It's not really working that way, but a little bit. This was layouts that we did for the print that we had to deliver. The shoes have different colors in their soles, and they also have different patterns on the top part of the shoe. So we thought we pick up the patterns that are there on the top part and just have it bleed out of the shoe into the background and have a bit more differentiation between the shoes by color and by pattern. So that's layouts that we did. You can see it's a bit rough because it's not really connecting to the floor right now. That is something you can put a bit more detail into the patterns, but you get the idea, and it's very good to put that in a PDF presentation, send it out to the client and get their thoughts back. More layouts, more layouts. This, of course, is not good at all because it features one shoe prominently, but we need to feature all 4 shoes in the same kind of way and not have one of their shoes sink into our milky ocean. So this didn't really work out for them, which is okay. And is this the final one? I can't even tell. Yeah, that's the final one. So as you can see, it didn't really change much over the course of the week or so that we were working on the print thing, but it's more in the details in these kind of projects, getting the patterns exactly right. Are the shoes angled? Are the shoes not angled? So that's the range of renderings that we send out to Nike. The main thing to generate, however, was an animation, and this was the result. 4 shoes, 4 different animations. And if you watch, when the next shot begins, the ripples that you can see in the Milky Ocean, they are generated exactly the same way as I've just shown with Chroma. Vertex maps, delays, spring-like smoothing, and remapping with a curve. So there's no simulation or anything, it's just the shoe pushing itself through the surface, generating the waves using a Cinema's field feature. And this is the last one. Another thing we did was short animations, 9 seconds, I think, for every individual athlete that has a Nike contract. These animations were sent out to the football players with a Nike contract, so they could use it on their Instagrams if they want. We did some 120 or 130 animations where it's just like power production. You switch out the images of the players, you generate the file. There's a collection of 80 animations that we did that I'm going to show right now, but the total number was, I think, something between 120, 130. Just very short Instagram use. Just to show the range of things that you have to do these days. It's not just that one animation. Pretty much all clients want a full package, and that's something that you have to consider when accepting jobs. Of course, a lot of work also went into layout, trying out things, how do we get the look, what kind of elements do we use, and just like with Chroma, we rendered out a lot of tests, layout things, moods, design studies, and when you just cut them in a row, add punchy music, you've got a video to show in presentations. Here's layout things that we didn't use. Playing around, doing stuff. That's why I like my job. And the last and final project that I want to show to you today is a TV commercial that we did for Swisslos. Swisslos is a lottery in Switzerland. You can bet on sporting games. And they wanted to have their package rebranded, to start out fresh, to get themselves maybe also a new image, appear fresh and forward moving, and there's a lot of text here. I'll just go through that quickly. What they wanted was a collection, a film that features a lot of different sports, because it's important that with Swisslos you can not only bet on football, but you can bet on, place bets on a lot of different sports. They wanted to have their spots be very energetic and sport-like, so it's fitting with the muscular image of sports. Show a variety of sports, and the important thing with Swisslos is, as it's state-owned, the money that is not being paid out to people who won their bets, but is sticking with Swisslos, is not going into new fancy cars of their bosses, but is actually used to support sport in Switzerland. So it's state-owned, and the revenue that is made by the bets is going back into sport events, creating opportunities for children to actually do sports. And the idea was to not have a too obvious look like what I've written here. They didn't want to, oh look, football, there's a football, I must be able to place bets on football because there is a football. They were open to a more Well, to a finer approach, to not have that obvious, bam, here's our message, bam, you are stupid, here's it again, but they wanted to have something more refined. So layouts that we did, also very much finished in the visual appearance, very nice to send out to the clients, very easy to understand where we are heading. Fortunately, Swisslos really loved them, so we didn't need to try out different ways. They liked the graphic approach, the simplified approach, to not show, oh, biking, here's a bike, but to keep, there is a bike, obviously, but it's not so prominent. It's a bit more hidden, and it's a bit more emphasis on design and making an image look nice, and not so much on a very clear, powerful message. As they said, they wanted things to be reduced. We also thought the idea would lend itself to also have the color palette reduced. So either going completely black and white or doing a warm, cold, contrasty thing. We went for something in the middle in the end. Like most of the times when you present two ways of doing something, the feedback is, yeah, we like both, can you do something in the middle? So the final thing will be something in the middle, not completely black and white, but also not so colorful as the top ones, because especially with this image here, with the two motorbikes, the feedback was that it looks a bit too Christmassy because of all the glowing little things, and that's not really sport and athletes. So, okay, we understood that, moved away from that. But what happened just by itself, without even thinking about it, we realized that at one point there's a lot of circles in the image. So we thought that having circles could be one of the ideas to follow through until the end and make everything based on circles. So that was pretty helpful, because it's just giving you that frame you can work in, having reduced colors, relying on circles a lot, of course breaking them up. Here's a rectangle to not have circles everywhere, but circular and reduced color palette, that was the two main things that we followed with this spot. And here's the finished one. And to round my presentation off, I only have 2 minutes or so left. This shot here is full CG, Goosebumps, because you can't really film them. When you're at the set having an actor with a really nice lower arm and you tell it, Goosebumps, now, there won't be goosebumps. So that's why we did that in 3D, and I brought the shot, because that was done in cinema as well in a really simple and straightforward way. Here's the original arm that we used. In close-ups, you don't really need to model a lot. If you go really close, this looks like a weird thing. If you go into a close-up, everyone is thinking, ooh, a lower arm. Don't work too much. That's another thing you can take from this presentation. Only do as much as necessary. If it looks right, it is right. We put, using a cloner, put spheres on top. Right now they're intersecting, which is not nice, because in reality things are not intersecting, but there's the push-apart deformer. So we add the push-apart deformer, switch it on, they are not intersecting anymore. And there's a plane effector, and that plane effector is moving the spheres up. And the plane effector has a fall-off. That's still done in release 19. There were no fields, so that's an old-fashioned fall-off, just a linear fall-off. And if you move that plane effector through my clones, they'll be moving down onto the surface. Now you might think, what that's not Goosebumps. That's spheres going down onto a surface. But okay, if you hit render, the thing is you don't really see the spheres, because I've hidden them for rendering, as you can see with this red dot here. I don't need the spheres for actual rendering. I need the spheres to generate a displacement map for me. Because what I do is I put a material on top, and in there's a displacement map, and the displacement map has got a proximal shader. What the proximal shader does is, during rendering, it's looking at all the clones or the spheres that I put onto my surface, and when a sphere is sitting on top of the surface, the proximal shader is generating a white dot. When the sphere is not sitting on the surface, it's moving away from the surface, the white dot will fade until it reaches a threshold distance, and then it's just black. So what happens is, my spheres that are sitting on the surface are generating white dots. We can see that. If I just take my proximal shader, put it into the luminance channel. Okay, no, no. The mouse is really quick here. Okay. Good thing there are always 3 ways to do stuff in cinema. Paste shader. If I hit render, you can see the proximal shader is now generating white dots where the spheres are sitting on the surface. And here where the spheres are moved up, there's no white dots. And if you don't use it as a color in rendering, but if you use these white dots as a displacement is just in rendering taking the surface and moving it up by 3 centimeters. As I put 3 centimeters in my height here. And if you hit render now, the white dots are transformed into small bumps, which are going to be my goosebumps. And the funny thing is, that's all there is to this shot. It's looking really simple now, but if you have good lighting, good shaders, depth of field always helps because you can't see shit. That's good. If this that's the scene. Put a skin shade on top, strong rim light from the back, depth of field, and you're done. You're nearly done, because if I use another 2 minutes, I can show you that what a goosebump does, for real, it's got a hair sticking in each bump. So that is something you would need in a close-up as well, having a hair sitting in exactly every bump that is relaxed, lying down, and then animated to move itself up for the goosebump to happen. So that's my last scene here. Here again, I've got my spheres sitting on the surface, and to be able to place hair exactly at the center of these scenes, I decided to use a tracer with the cloner in there. What the tracer is doing, it's generating a really wild spline connecting all the spheres that I had. And now I can use this spline because there's a point on the spline exactly at the center of every sphere that I had. I can use this as the base to put hair on. Here's my spline. If I show you the vertices, a point at exactly the center of every sphere that I had. So I put hair on top. I tell my hair system to generate hair on every vertex on that spline, and I generate hair that is standing upright on every vertex of that spline. So now I have 2 hair systems. One where the hair is standing upright, one where it's flat, so I need to blend between these 2 states. In hair, you can tell it to generate splines, so if I hit C, I don't have hair anymore, but I have actual splines. And splines are very nice to have because they support post-morph tags. So, the last null object here, I unfold it and I unhide it. What I have is, I have the hair standing up, and the hair that was lying down is still there, but I linked it as a morph target in my post-morph tag. So now I have a slider that is giving me control over the hair is lying down, the hair is standing up, and the hair sits exactly at the spheres that are creating my goosebumps, so that is matching together. The only thing now to finish this shot off is to take the animation from the plane effector that was moving through my spheres, creating the bumps on the surface, to control that blending. And you can put a fall-off onto a post-morph tag by using a morph deformer. Morph deformer is a deformer that can be found in here, somewhere, morph deformer. And the morph deformer is just taking in post-morph tags that are sitting on the object it is applied to, and it's giving you a fall-off. So if I activate this, I can use the same fall-off here as I have used for the spheres to move down. And as I use my morph deformer, let's hide everything we don't need, this one. And as I move the morph deformer through here, I get the same fall-off as I get for controlling my spheres. So the hair is standing up while the spheres are moving down. The bumps are generated on the surface, the hair is standing up, and there's your finished setup for the shot. Once again, shaders, depth of field, strong rim light, and you've got a shot done. And I've got my presentation done. I'd like to say thank you for hanging out with me.